In the beginning, God made heaven and earth. At first it was empty and dark. So God gathered up the light and called it day. He gathered up the darkness and called it night. God watches over everything. On day 2, God divided the air from the water. He put some water above the air and some below it. He named the air sky. On day 3, God was busy making puddles, oceans, lakes, waterfalls, rivers, and the dry ground too. He made so many different kinds of plants, trees, flowers, and bushes, no one could count them all. God said his work was good. On day 4, God put the sun in the sky to warm the earth by day, and put the moon and the stars in the sky to shine at night. Then God made spring, summer, fall, and winter. All that he made was good. On day 5, God made starfishes, octopuses, whales, and turtles. He made fast little fish for rivers and slippery big fish for the ocean. He made big birds like eagles to soar in the sky, and zippy little birds like hummingbirds. He made birds in all shapes, sizes, and colors. On day 6, God made the animals: puppies, cows, horses, kitties, bears, lizards, mice, worms, and lots more. Everything was good. But something was still missing. There were no people. So God made some. He made them to be just like him. He did this so they would become friends with him. God named the first man Adam and put him in a beautiful garden. God gave Adam all the animals, all the fish, and all the birds too. Then God gave Adam one more thing: a woman to be his wife.
I will call you Eve.
God gave Adam and Eve just one rule. They could eat anything they wanted, except the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden. But a sneaky snake came to Eve.
Eve, look at this tasty fruit. God knows if you eat it, you will know everything, just like him.
So Eve ate the fruit. And then gave some to Adam. He ate it too. One evening, God came to visit Adam and Eve. But they were hiding. When God found them, he asked what they had done. So Adam told what they had done. Which made God sad. Because they had disobeyed God, Adam and Eve had to leave the beautiful garden. When they were outside of the garden, they had to work very hard just to grow their food. Long ago, God saw that the people on the earth were becoming very bad. But one man, Noah, obeyed God.
Noah, I want you to build a boat.
Noah started right away.
What on earth is this guy
But the
doing?
people laughed at Noah because they lived in a desert and there was no water anywhere for his boat. But Noah just went on building the boat. When the boat was finally finished, God told Noah and his family to go into the boat. In went his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In went their wives and Mrs. Noah.
Now bring 2 of every animal.
Noah did exactly what God told him to do, and God watched over him. When the last animal climbed into the boat, God shut the door. Then it began to rain. It rained so much the water was over the meadows. It rained so much it covered the towns. It rained so much it even covered the mountains. But inside the boat, everyone was safe. After 40 days and after 40 nights, the rain finally stopped. But it still wasn't time to get off the boat. Water was everywhere. One day, Noah let a little dove fly out to see what was happening on the earth. It brought a green leaf back. Hooray! The plants were growing again. It was almost time to come out. At last, everyone was out of the boat, and Noah built an altar.
Thank you, God, for keeping us safe.
Then something wonderful happened. God put a beautiful rainbow in the sky and made Noah a promise.
I will never flood the whole earth like that again.
And when God makes a promise, He keeps it.
God picked Abram to be the father of a very important family. One day in the future, Jesus would be born into this family. God told Abram,
I will bless you with as many children and grandchildren as the stars, as many as the grains of sand on the beach. You will not be able to count them all. Abram, I want you to move to a new place. I will show you where to go.
So Abram started out walking. He took his wife, their nephew, and all their servants along. When Abram and his family came to the land called Canaan, God said,
This is your new home. I give it to you and to everyone who will ever be in your family.
When Abram was 99 years old, God changed his name to Abraham. His new name showed that he belonged to God. Not long after that, 3 men came by Abraham's tent, and he invited them to lunch. Abraham told his wife Sarah,
Sarah, bake some bread. I'm going to get some meat and cook it.
When the food was ready, Abraham brought it to his visitors.
Please, friends, sit down and eat.
When one of the visitors finished eating, he asked where Abraham's wife Sarah was.
She's over in the other tent.
The visitor said,
Next year, Sarah will have a baby.
but Sarah wasn't over in the other tent. She was just outside and heard what the visitor said. She laughed out loud. She couldn't believe it. I'm too old to have a baby, she thought. And Abraham is too old to be a father. In about a year, Sarah had a baby boy, just like God had promised long ago. Abraham named the baby Isaac, which means laughter.
Everyone who hears about my miracle will be happy with me.
Sarah was so happy she knew he was a gift from God. Abraham's son Isaac was all grown up. So Abraham told his servant,
Go back to the land I came from and find a wife for my son.
The servant loaded up camels with all kinds of wonderful presents and rode off. After he got to the land far away, he wasn't sure how to find a wife for Isaac. At a place where girls came to get water, he prayed,
Let the right girl give me water.
Before the servant had finished praying, a beautiful young woman came to get water.
Will you give me some water, please?
Yes, I'll get water for your camels, too.
It was a big job. Thirsty camels can drink a lot of water. Back and forth she went, pouring water for them all. The servant knew this woman was the one to be Isaac's wife. Her name was Rebekah. The servant took gifts to her family and asked if Rebekah could marry Isaac. Her father said she could, and Rebekah wanted to get married too. So she went home with the servant to meet Isaac. The camels swayed and bumped along the road all the way to Canaan, where Isaac lived. One evening, just before the sun went down, the camels stopped. A young man was walking in the field. He looked up and saw the camels. His bride had come. Isaac loved Rebekah. And so they were married. For many years, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, couldn't have babies. So Isaac prayed to God about the problem. God heard Isaac, and he sent 2 babies, twins. When the twins were born, one was all red and fuzzy. Isaac and Rebekah named him Esau. The other twin had smooth skin. They named him Jacob. Someday, these 2 boys would grow up to be the leaders of 2 great families. And the boys did grow up. One day, Esau came in from hunting. Jacob was cooking.
I'm hungry. Give me some of that soup.
Jacob was a sneaky guy.
Give me your rights as the firstborn son, and I will.
Okay. If I starve, my rights won't help me.
So Jacob gave Esau a big bowl of soup, and he ate it. Esau didn't even know he'd been tricked. Years later, Jacob's mother, Rebekah, helped him trick his father, Isaac, as well. And Isaac gave Jacob the blessing meant for Esau. So Isaac gave everything he had to Jacob, while foolish Esau got nothing.
Jacob had tricked his older brother Esau, who became very angry. Jacob was afraid and ran away from Esau. That night in the desert, Jacob had to sleep outside with a rock under his head for a pillow. He dreamed about a ladder to heaven, filled with angels. God spoke to Jacob in the dream and promised to bless him. Jacob continued his journey, traveling a long way. And ending up at the house of a man called Laban. There he met Laban's beautiful daughter Rachel. Jacob fell in love with her. He told Laban,
I'll stay here and work for you if you'll let me marry Rachel.
So Jacob stayed and worked 7 years for the woman he loved. After 7 years of hard work, it was finally time for Jacob's wedding. Everyone got dressed. The bride wore a heavy veil over her face. It was so heavy that Jacob couldn't see through it.
To be your bride.
I do.
And now, blessed by God, you are man and wife.
You guessed it. Laban had tricked Jacob. Rachel was not under the veil. It was her sister Leah instead. Jacob was mad at Laban.
What have you done?
Work some more, and I'll give you Rachel too.
Jacob married Rachel and worked 7 more years.
And now, blessed by God, you are man and wife.
At long last, Jacob decided to leave Rachel's sneaky father. He took his family and everything he had and started back home. When Jacob was almost home, a servant arrived with important news.
Your brother, Esau, is coming.
Jacob thought Esau was coming to hurt him. Jacob was afraid and prayed.
God, save me from my brother.
That night, a man who was really God appeared. Jacob wrestled with the man.
Bless me!
So God blessed Jacob and changed his name to Israel. The next morning, Jacob saw Esau coming. Jacob bowed down in fear of his older brother. Surprise! Esau was happy to see Jacob. Esau ran to Jacob and gave him hugs and kisses.
Who are all these people?
They are my family. God has been good to me.
And so the 2 long-lost brothers became friends again. Jacob had 12 sons. He loved them all, but he loved his son Joseph best. Joseph liked to tell his brothers about his dreams. In one dream, he saw all 12 brothers had bundles of wheat. Then he said 11 bundles bowed down to his bundle. That made the older brothers mad.
You're not the king over us.
When Joseph turned 17, Jacob gave him a beautiful coat with long sleeves. This also made Joseph's brothers jealous. One spring, Jacob asked Joseph to go check on his older brothers and their cattle. So off Joseph went. His brothers saw him coming.
Here comes the dreamer. Let's get rid of him.
The brothers hated Joseph, but one of them felt bad.
Let's not hurt him. Let's just throw him down this well.
He planned to rescue Joseph later. So they took off Joseph's coat and threw him in. About that time, some men on camels rode by.
Hey, let's sell him to be a slave.
So they sold their own brother. But God was watching over him. Soon, a rich man named Potiphar bought him to work in his palace.
Promises to be years of good service.
Joseph did a good job in everything Potiphar asked him to do.
Joseph, come here.
Potiphar was pleased.
How can I help you?
Joseph, I'm putting you in charge of my whole house.
Everyone had to do everything Joseph said.
Things were going great for Joseph.
Right over there.
Until one day, Potiphar's wife tried to trick him. When her tricks didn't work, she told lies about Joseph. And Potiphar believed her.
God!
Potiphar threw Joseph into jail. Poor Joseph. His brothers sold him. A lady lied about him, and he was thrown into jail. It wasn't fair. But God had a plan for Joseph.
I dreamed I saw a vine.
One day, another prisoner told Joseph about a dream he'd had. Joseph listened carefully, and God showed him what the man's dream meant.
In 3 days, you will be working for the king of Egypt, like you did before being put in prison.
Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Another prisoner dreamed he had 3 baskets of bread that he had baked for the king. In his dream, the birds kept eating up all the bread. Joseph didn't have very good news about the dream.
In 3 days, you will die.
Joseph told the truth. The man did die. One night, the king of Egypt dreamed that 7 skinny cows came from the river and ate up 7 fat cows. No one could figure out what the dream meant,
Your Highness, call for Joseph.
said the first man who had told Joseph his dream in prison. And God showed Joseph what the king's dream meant.
There will be 7 years with lots of food,
Yeah! Yeah!
followed by 7 years with almost no food.
The king knew that Joseph was right.
Joseph had been in jail, but he was innocent. So the king of Egypt let him out. The king also put Joseph in charge of gathering enough food to feed everyone during the hungry time. The king took off his royal ring and put it on Joseph's finger. He gave Joseph fine clothes to wear and put a gold chain around his neck. The king had Joseph ride in one of the royal chariots. And everyone had to bow down to him. For the next 7 years, Joseph stored lots of food. Then a time came when no rain fell and no crops could be grown. This is called a famine. It was bad for other lands, but thanks to Joseph, the people of Egypt had food. Joseph's family back home were very hungry. His father, Jacob, told his sons,
"Go to Egypt and buy grain."
So 10 brothers packed up and went to Egypt. The youngest brother, Benjamin, stayed home. When the brothers came to the palace, Joseph knew right away who they were. But they didn't recognize their own brother, who they had sold as a slave many years ago.
You're all spies.
Joseph said to test them. They were shocked.
No, we've come to buy food.
They told Joseph all about their
We
family.
haven't come here because we're spies.
Joseph still loved his brothers, so he gave them the food. The famine was long and had spread to every country. Soon, Jacob and his 10 sons needed more food. So the sons went back to Egypt, this time bringing young Benjamin with them. Joseph told his servants to prepare a feast for the men, who he secretly knew were his own brothers. When Joseph came to the feast, all the brothers bowed down to him. Oh my! It reminded Joseph of his childhood dream about his brothers' bundles of wheat bowing down to his. And then Joseph saw Benjamin. This made him so happy he began to cry. But he didn't let anyone see his tears. Joseph gave the brothers the grain they wanted. But he also tricked them. He put his royal cup in Benjamin's sack. The rule was that whoever took something from the ruler had to be his servant forever. When the cup was discovered, Benjamin couldn't go home. The brothers begged Joseph not to keep Benjamin.
It will break our father's heart to lose 2 sons.
Hearing this almost broke Joseph's heart. He saw that his brothers had really changed. Joseph couldn't keep his secret another minute. He sent all the Egyptians out of the room. But after they left, all he could do was cry. Jacob's sons were very frightened. They didn't know why this man was crying. Finally, Joseph was able to speak.
I am your brother Joseph. You sold me to be a slave, but God sent me here to Egypt to save your lives.
His brothers didn't know what to say.
Is my father Jacob still alive? Hurry, go home and get our father and your families and bring them all here.
After they had all cried and hugged each other, the brothers did as Joseph commanded. And that's how God's people, the Israelites, came to live in Egypt.
Many years after God's people moved to Egypt, there came a new king who had never known Joseph. The Egyptians called their kings Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was mean and made the Israelites his slaves. The Egyptians were mean too. They made the Israelites work harder and harder. One day, Pharaoh had a thought.
There are too many Israelites, and they are too strong.
So he thought up an awful thing to do. He told his servants,
Every time an Israelite baby boy is born, you must throw him into the river.
That was terrible. One day, an Israelite woman had a beautiful baby boy. She decided to hide her baby. It was a good choice. After a while, the baby's mother couldn't hide him anymore. So she got a basket and fixed it so the water could not get inside. Then she put the baby into the basket and put the basket into the river. The baby's big sister, Miriam, stayed close by to see what would happen. God was watching over the baby. The Egyptian princess came to the river to take a bath and saw the basket.
Bring me that basket.
Just as her servants brought her the basket, the baby cried out.
Oh, look, it's a little Hebrew baby.
The princess decided to keep him as her son. She named him Moses. Miriam was still watching. Even though she was frightened, she stepped out of her hiding place and asked,
Would you like me to find a Hebrew nurse to take care of the baby?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Miriam ran home and got her mother, Moses' own mother. The princess even paid her to take care of him. This is how God saved baby Moses and gave him back to his mother for a long time. When he was a little baby, Moses the Israelite was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up in the great palace of Egypt. When he was all grown up, Moses did something very bad. He killed an Egyptian man.
Hey, look!
So Moses ran away to live in the desert. He married a lady named Zipporah. One day, when Moses was out with the sheep, he saw a bush in the desert. It was on fire, but it didn't burn up. Moses went to look at this strange sight. God spoke from the fire.
Moses, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. You are on holy ground.
Moses was scared. He covered his face.
I want you to bring my people out of Egypt. I can't do that.
But God promised to help Moses lead the people. So Moses returned to Egypt to talk to the Israelites about being free.
God is going to set all of you free from Pharaoh.
God also sent Moses' brother Aaron along to help him. The Israelites fell right down on their knees and thanked God for remembering them. Then it was time for Moses to go see Pharaoh.
Moses appeared before Pharaoh.
God says, "Let my people go."
Pharaoh was not pleased.
I do not know your God. Why should I obey him? These people have work to do. They cannot leave.
Then Pharaoh made the people work even harder. What a mean man! This made the Israelite leaders angry with Moses. They thought Moses had surely made a big mistake.
You made the king hate us! You made the king hate us!
Go on,
Go now!
Yeah! Get back there.
Moses prayed,
Lord, why have you brought this trouble on the people? Is this why you sent me here?
God answered,
You will see what I will do to the king.
Moses, let's go.
God sent Moses and Aaron back to Pharaoh.
Well, look who's come back.
Let God's people go.
Do a miracle for me if your God is so great.
Aaron threw down his walking stick, and it became a snake.
Oh, I know how they do this.
Pharaoh's magicians threw down their sticks, and they became snakes too. But Aaron's snake swallowed them all. God's power was the strongest. Still, Pharaoh was so evil and his heart was so hard that he said,
"No, your people cannot leave."
When God's people left Egypt, they marched out into the desert. God did something very special to help them. He sent a tall cloud to guide them during the day. It was very dark in the desert at night, so God changed the cloud to fire. It was like a giant nightlight. Now God's people could travel, some during the day and some at night. Back in Egypt, Pharaoh had changed his mind about letting God's people leave. He sent his army after the Israelites to bring them back. Closer and closer, the army of horses and chariots came. God's people stood right by the Red Sea. There was no way across the water. Pharaoh's soldiers were behind them, and the sea was in front of them. It looked as if they were trapped. Just then, God moved the tall cloud behind his people to hide them from the enemy. The Egyptians couldn't see anything. The cloud made it dark for them, but it gave light to God's people on the other side of the cloud. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea. All night, God pushed back the sea with a strong wind, and the water split to make a dry path to the other side. The Israelites safely reached the other side, but when the Egyptian army tried to use the same path, the water came back together and covered the soldiers. And that was the end of Pharaoh's army.
God led his people out of Egypt, heading for the Promised Land. He had parted the Red Sea for them, and now they were in the desert. Soon, the people began complaining.
We should have stayed in Egypt. There we had meat and all the food we wanted, but we'll starve to death in this desert.
But God still loved his people. He made sure they had plenty of food and water. He gave them a strange white food called manna. It came from the sky and was very good for them, but still the people whined and complained. Once, God even made water come out of a rock so they would have fresh water to drink. The people were happy to have water, and they stopped whining for a little while. One day, God called Moses up to the top of a mountain to have a talk. God gave Moses many rules to help his people know how to live. God wrote the rules on stone with his finger. We call these rules the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God. You must not have any other gods except me. Do not worship or serve any other gods or idols. Do not speak the name of the Lord your God thoughtlessly. Keep the Lord's day holy. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder anyone. Be true to your husband or wife. Do not steal. Do not tell lies. Do not wish for someone else's things.
Finally, it was time for God's people to enter the promised land. But first, they had to cross the Jordan River. There were no bridges or boats. God told the priests to carry the holy box and walk into the water. When they did, God made a dry path, and his people walked across to the other side of the river. The first city they came to was Jericho. It had huge walls and gates and guards everywhere. God said,
"March around Jericho every day for 6 days. 7 priests with trumpets must march at the front. On the 7th day, march around 7 times. Then have the priests blow one long blast on their trumpets. The people must shout, and the walls will fall down."
The people obeyed, and down came the walls. Joshua fought hard to win the land God had promised to his people. And God helped him. One time, God even sent huge hailstones to fall on the enemy. During that same battle, Joshua said,
"Sun, stand still!"
And God kept the sun right where it was until his people finally won the battle.
Close to the end of their time in the desert, God's people camped near a walled city. The king of that city was afraid when he saw so many people camped nearby. He sent for a prophet named Balaam.
Do something to make these people go away.
So Balaam started off on his donkey to see what he could do. That made God angry because he wanted his people to be there. So God sent up an angel with a sword to stop Balaam. Balaam couldn't see the angel, but his donkey could, and stopped suddenly. So Balaam started to beat the donkey to make it go. But the donkey said,
"Why are you beating me?"
You have made me look foolish. I wish I had a sword in my hand. I would kill you right now.
But the donkey wasn't afraid.
You have ridden me for years. Have I ever done this to you before?
At this point, Balaam realized he was talking to a donkey.
No. No, you haven't.
Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes to see the angel. Balaam quickly bowed face down on the ground. The angel spoke.
God sent me to stop you from harming his people. If your donkey had not turned away, I would have killed you.
Balaam was shocked.
I have sinned against the Lord. I will not do this thing.
And that's how God used a donkey to save his people.
One day, the angel of the Lord came to a man named Gideon, who was working hard on his family's farm.
The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Go save God's people from their enemy.
But Gideon hesitated.
My family is the weakest in our tribe, and I am the weakest in our family.
Gideon, the Lord will be with you.
So, after talking some more with the angel, Gideon believed God and agreed to do what the angel had told him. Before long, Gideon had gathered up a great army. But when God saw it, he said,
"You have too many men. I don't want the Israelites to brag that they saved themselves."
So God told Gideon to make an announcement.
Any man who is afraid of the enemy may go home.
And thousands of them did just that. But then God told Gideon he still had too many men.
Take the men down to the water to drink. Keep only those men who use their hands to bring water to their mouths.
Most of the men carelessly tossed their weapons on the ground and put their faces right into the water. Only 300 soldiers drank the way God wanted. So this was Gideon's army. Next, God gave Gideon very strange instructions.
Each man is to take a trumpet, a jar, and a torch.
Later, in the dark of night, Gideon's men surrounded the camp while the enemy was sleeping. When everyone was in position, they shouted,
"The sword of the Lord has Gideon! The sword of the Lord
Then they blew their trumpets and smashed their pots, so the fire from their torches circled the enemy. But each of Gideon's men stayed in their place. Down in the valley, the enemy soldiers woke up and were so scared that they began fighting one another. With great noise and confusion, the enemy soldiers all ran away. And that is how God used Gideon to save his people from their enemies.
One of the leaders of God's people was chosen before he was born. An angel told the mother,
"You will have a son, but you must never cut his hair. His long hair will show that he's a Nazirite, someone who has work to do for God."
This baby grew up to be very strong. His name was Samson. And he always won against his enemies. Samson had a friend named Delilah. She asked,
"What makes you so strong, Samson?"
At first, he wouldn't tell her. She begged and whined. Finally, he said,
If someone shaved my head, I would lose my strength.
When Samson fell asleep, Delilah had someone shave off his hair. Samson wasn't strong anymore. Now his enemies had no trouble taking him to their prison. In prison, Samson's hair grew long again. One night, his enemies had a party. They brought Samson in and made fun of him. Samson prayed,
Lord, please, give me strength one more time.
And God did. When Samson pushed against the pillars that held up the building, down it all came on top of everyone. Those people would never hurt anyone again. Ruth and Naomi were widows. That means their husbands had died. Young Ruth had been married to Naomi's son. One day, Naomi decided to go back home to Israel where she was born. Ruth wanted to go with her. Naomi feared that Ruth would miss her family and friends, so she told Ruth not to come. But Ruth said,
"Please, don't ask me to leave you. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God."
And so they went together. But Ruth and Naomi were very poor. They didn't have enough to eat. Naomi was too old to work, so Ruth went out to a rich man's field to gather leftover grain for food. One day, the rich man named Boaz saw Ruth. She was a beautiful young woman.
stay here. Work in my field.
Naomi decided Boaz would be a good husband for Ruth. So she came up with a plan to find out if Boaz wanted to marry Ruth. That night, Ruth went to the field where Boaz had been working hard all day. He was sleeping beside a pile of grain, and Ruth quietly laid down at his feet. About midnight, Boaz woke up suddenly and rolled over. He was startled. There was a woman lying near his feet.
Ruth, is that you?
Yes, I am Ruth, your servant. Please spread your cover over me if you want to take care of me.
Boaz was pleased.
The Lord bless you, Ruth. Your kindness to me is great. Everyone knows you are a very good woman.
Boaz loved Ruth and asked to marry her. After they were married, Ruth had a little boy, which made all of them very happy.
An Israelite woman named Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah. They were happy together. But Hannah wasn't able to have any children. One of the other mothers was mean to Hannah and often made fun of her because she had no children. One day, Hannah got so upset that she went to God's holy tent to pray for a baby.
Lord of heaven, please don't forget me. If you will give me a son, I will give him back to you all his life.
While Hannah kept praying, Eli the priest noticed something strange. Hannah's lips moved, but he couldn't hear her voice. He didn't realize that she was praying in her heart. Eli thought she must be doing something wrong.
No, Master, I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I was telling the Lord about all the problems and sadness in my heart.
Ah, well, may the God of Israel give you what you asked of him.
Hearing this, Hannah was not sad anymore. And very soon, Hannah's prayer was answered. She had a baby boy and named him Samuel, which means God heard. Hannah and Elkanah were very happy. Several years passed, and young Samuel was growing up. But Hannah never forgot her promise to the Lord. So she traveled with Samuel to see Eli the priest.
My master, I am the same woman who stood near you praying for a child many years ago. The Lord has given me a son, and now I give him back to the Lord. He will belong to the Lord all his life.
So Samuel went to live in the temple. And every year, Hannah made her son a new coat because of her great love for little Samuel.
As a young boy, Samuel was sent to help Eli the priest in doing the Lord's work. One night, Samuel ran to where Eli was sleeping. Samuel had heard someone call his name, and he thought it was Eli.
I didn't call you. Go back to bed.
So Samuel went back to bed, but the voice called him 2 more times. After the 3rd time, Eli knew that God was calling Samuel. Eli told Samuel that it must be God speaking.
Next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening."
God told Samuel that he was going to punish Eli's sons because they were evil. Samuel grew up to be a godly man. A war broke out, and God's people decided to take the holy box into battle. But this went against God's rules. Guess what? The enemy captured the holy box of God and took it home with them. God's people were sad. As soon as the enemy got the holy box of God home, bad things started happening to them. They wanted to get rid of it. They put the holy box in a cart pulled by 2 cows and sent it home. When God's people saw the holy box coming, they were so happy. The enemy wasn't quite through yet. They saw God's people meeting together and decided to attack them. The people begged Samuel to pray. When he did, God sent a thunderclap so loud, it frightened the enemy soldiers. Then God's people chased them away.
Samuel had become a prophet. God sent him to the house of a man named Jesse to choose a new king for Israel. When Samuel looked at 7 of Jesse's sons, God said to him,
"Don't look at how tall or handsome they are."
Are these all of your sons?
My youngest son is taking care of the sheep. His name is David.
God said to Samuel,
"David is the one I have chosen."
But David was just a boy, serving his father as a shepherd. It was his job to protect and care for sheep. While he was with the sheep, he used to make up songs and sing them to God. One of those songs says,
"The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need."
As David watched the sheep, he became close friends with God. God's Holy Spirit came to be with David, making him brave and strong. One day, Jesse sent his son David to go check on his brothers, who were soldiers. When David got to the battlefield, he found the Israelite soldiers were all afraid of a giant named Goliath. Goliath liked to yell at the soldiers and scare them. He wanted to hurt them. But David wasn't afraid of Goliath. he gathered 5 small, smooth stones and put them in his pouch. Then, with his slingshot in one hand, David went to meet Goliath. The giant laughed when he saw that David was just a boy. But David shot a stone from the slingshot. It hit Goliath in the head and killed him. By killing the giant Goliath, David became a hero. God's people loved him. But King Saul became jealous of David. King Saul had a son named Jonathan, who was a prince of Israel and David's best friend. King Saul told Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. So Jonathan decided to warn his friend.
My father is looking for a chance to kill you, but I have a plan. Tomorrow morning, you hide behind that big rock. I'll come out with my bow and pretend to shoot at a target. Then I'll send a boy to find the arrows. If I say to him, "No, you've gone too far. The arrows are closer to me," that means you are safe. But if I say, "Go farther. The arrows went past the big rock," that means my father won't change his mind, and you are in danger.
So David hid behind the rock. Saul and Jonathan were nearby. The king was very angry with his son.
Jonathan, don't you know that as long as David is alive, you'll never be king? He must die!
But father, David has done nothing wrong.
Then Saul threw his spear at Jonathan, trying to kill his own son. So Jonathan and his servant ran away toward the big rock. Jonathan said to the boy,
"Run and find this arrow."
When the boy ran toward the rock, Jonathan shot the arrow way beyond the rock and called out,
"Go further. The arrows went past you."
So David knew the news was bad. When the boy left, David came out and hugged his dear friend. Even though they were grown men, they were both crying. But David cried the most.
David, my friend, go in peace. We have been promised by the Lord that you and I and all our descendants will be friends forever.
Years later, Jonathan and his father died in a battle against Israel's enemy, and David became king. Because of his great friendship with Jonathan, King David took care of Jonathan's crippled son Mephibosheth for the rest of his life. After King David died, his son Solomon became king of Israel. One night, God came to Solomon in a dream.
Ask for anything you want, and I will give it to you.
Lord, my God, you have allowed me to be king in my father's place. But I am like a little child. I do not have the wisdom I need to do what I must do. So I ask that you give me wisdom. Wisdom to know the difference between right and wrong.
The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom.
Since you asked for wisdom, and not long life, or riches, or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked. Your wisdom will be greater than anyone has ever had in the past.
So God gave Solomon everything he needed to become a great king. One day, two women brought a baby to Solomon. One woman said,
My master, this woman and I live in the same house. We each gave birth to a baby the same week. No one else was in the house with us. One night, this woman's baby died. So during the night, she took my son from my bed while I was asleep and put the dead baby in my bed.
But the other woman said,
No, the living baby is my son. The dead baby is yours.
So the two women argued in front of the king. But Solomon knew just what to do to find out who the real mother was.
Bring me a sword.
So his servants brought the sword.
Cut the living baby into 2 pieces and give each woman half.
The servants were shocked, but the king remained firm. So as the sword was raised, one woman cried out,
No, don't hurt the baby. Give him to her.
But the other woman said,
Neither of us will have him. Cut him in half.
Woman, your son.
When the people of Israel heard about King Solomon's decision, they knew God had given him wisdom to make the right decisions. After Samuel, David, and Solomon died, God's people were split into 2 kingdoms, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. The ruler of Israel was King Ahab, who did many things that God said were wrong. He worshipped idols and did more evil than any king before him. So God sent Elijah, the prophet, to teach Ahab a lesson.
Ahab, God says there will be no rain for many years.
This made Ahab very angry. Elijah had to run away from Ahab and camp near a brook. God sent birds to bring the prophet food. When the brook dried up, God told Elijah to go ask a certain woman for food.
I only have enough left for 1 meal for me and my son.
But Elijah said,
Cook for me first, and you'll be all right.
When she obeyed, God did a miracle. She didn't run out of food for 3 years. After those 3 years passed with no rain, God told Elijah to go meet King Ahab.
There you are, you troublemaker.
But it was really the king who caused the trouble.
Let's see whose God is real.
So the king's prophets built one altar to their God, and Elijah built an altar to his God. They put offerings on each of them. Then they prayed and waited to see whose God would answer their prayers by sending fire to burn up the sacrifice. The king's prophets screamed at their fake gods to send fire. No fire came. Elijah teased.
Pray louder. Your God must be sleeping.
They did. But nothing happened. When they stopped, Elijah had water poured over everything on the altar he'd built. Then he prayed to God in heaven to send fire. Fire came down. It burnt up the offering, the stones, and the water. Then the people knew that Elijah's God was the most powerful of all.
Naaman was an important soldier in Damascus, but he got a terrible skin disease called leprosy. People who had leprosy were not allowed to come close to other people. They had to live in lepers' towns. Naaman's wife had a little servant girl from Israel who said,
I wish my master could meet Elisha the prophet. He would heal him.
So Naaman went to Israel to find Elisha.
Tell him to wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and he'll be healed.
The Jordan River. Wash 7 times in the Jordan.
Naaman walked away angry. What Elisha told him to do seemed silly.
He didn't even come out to talk to me himself. I thought Elisha would call on the Lord or wave his hand over me and heal the disease. Our rivers in Damascus are all better than the Jordan.
So Naaman prepared to return to Damascus, but his servant pleaded with him.
Sir, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? Doesn't it make more sense to just do what he said?
So even though Naaman was embarrassed, he went down to the river to wash himself as Elisha had instructed. After Naaman finished washing for the 7th time, guess what happened? His leprosy disappeared.
Now I know there is no God in all the earth except the God of Israel.
God's people were captured and taken away to the country of Babylon. The king of that country was named Nebuchadnezzar. 3 young Israelites, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, worked for King Nebuchadnezzar. But when the king wanted them to bow down and worship a golden idol he made, they wouldn't do it.
We can't. Let's go.
So the king called for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Is it true that you did not worship the golden statue I have set up? I will give you a second chance to bow down and worship, or no God will be able to save you from my power.
Nebuchadnezzar, you certainly have the power to throw us into the furnace. And our God has the power to save us. But even if he doesn't, we will not worship your statue.
The king was furious and told his soldiers to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown in. But guess what happened? The men in the furnace didn't burn up. God sent someone to protect them in the furnace. The king was surprised when he saw 4 people walking around. So he told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out of the furnace. And the king made a new law. No one would be allowed to say anything bad about the God of Israel.
Daniel was one of God's people who was a slave in Babylon. But God had blessed him with power to understand dreams. Years ago, he had even helped a king of Babylon understand a dream. But now there was a new king in Babylon. One night, Belshazzar gave a banquet for many important people. Suddenly, a hand appeared and began writing on the wall in words that no one could read. The king was very scared. But the king's mother remembered Daniel.
There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy God in him. Call for Daniel. He will tell you what the writing on the wall means.
God has counted the days until your kingdom will end. You have been weighed on the scales and found not good enough. Your kingdom will be given to the Medes and the Persians.
That very same night, Belshazzar was killed. A man named Darius the Mede became the new king. It all happened exactly as Daniel had said. In time, Daniel went to work for the new king, even though he served the God of Israel. Some men from the new kingdom of the Medes were jealous of Daniel and wanted to get rid of him. So they tricked Darius into making a rule that people could only pray to the king. If someone broke the rule, he would be thrown into the lion's den. But Daniel went to his house, got down on his knees, and prayed to God, just as he had always done. So the men caught Daniel praying to God and told the king. The king was sad because he liked Daniel, but he couldn't change the law.
May the God you serve all the time save you.
So Daniel was thrown into a den of hungry lions, and a huge stone was rolled over the entrance. But God sent an angel to close the mouths of the lions so they couldn't bite. Early in the morning, the king came to the lion's den.
Daniel, has your God been able to save you from the lions?
Yes, my king. God sent his angel to close the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because I am innocent.
And that's how God saved the man who trusted in him. The land of Babylon was ruled by the king of Persia. But God's people were still living in Babylon. One of them was a young woman named Esther. The king of Persia wanted a beautiful young woman to be his queen. And he chose Esther. About this time, Esther's cousin Mordecai got in trouble.
Hey, Mordecai. Here comes General Haman. You better bow down to the leader of the king's army.
No, I will only bow down to the God of my
This made Haman so angry that he made a plan to kill all God's people living in Persia. Neither Haman nor the king knew that Queen Esther was related to Mordecai, or even that she was one of God's people. So the king agreed to Haman's evil plan. When Mordecai found out about the plan, he went secretly to visit the queen.
You must go to the king and beg him to have mercy on our people.
But I have not been called to the king. Anyone who enters his throne room without permission will be killed. Unless he holds out his gold scepter.
Yes, you may be killed. But who knows? You may have been chosen queen for just such a time as this.
The young woman had a big decision to make. One that could get her killed, or it could save God's people.
All right. Tell all God's people to stop eating and start praying for me. I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I die, I die.
So Esther put on her royal robes and went to see the king. When the king's servants saw her, they were afraid she would be put to death. But when the king saw Esther, he was very pleased. Slowly, he held out his gold scepter.
What is it, my queen? What do you want to ask me?
My king, I ask that you have mercy on me and my people, the Jews. Haman wants us all to be killed.
And that day, the king decided to save Esther and all God's people from Haman's evil plan. God spoke to a man named Jonah.
Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it. I see the evil things they do.
So Jonah got up and boarded a boat that would take him to Tarshish? Wait, that's not where God told Jonah to go. He was supposed to go to Nineveh. This ship was going the opposite direction. But God saw what Jonah was doing. So Jonah sailed away on the ship. Before long, God sent a big storm. Waves pounded the ship. The sailors were afraid and started throwing cargo into the sea, hoping to lighten the ship so it wouldn't sink. The captain went down into the bottom of the ship and found Jonah sleeping.
Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will save us.
But Jonah had already told some of the sailors that he was running away from the Lord.
Jonah has done something terrible to cause the storm.
You're right. I ran away from God. It's my fault that this storm has come upon you. Throw me into the sea, and it will calm down.
So the sailors tossed Jonah overboard. As soon as Jonah was in the water, the sea became calm. Down into the swirling water went Jonah. Then, gulp! Something swallowed him. Jonah was in the stomach of a big fish. God left him there to learn an important lesson. It took 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, Jonah prayed to God.
Lord, I praise you and I thank you. You saved me from death. I promise that I will do what you want.
So God spoke to the great fish. It swam up close to the beach and spit Jonah out of its stomach and onto dry land.
Now, get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. When you get there, preach what I tell you to preach.
This time, Jonah didn't argue. He obeyed right away, jumping up and heading straight for Nineveh.